Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be painting up the Eldar Cobra heavy Grav tank, which I 3D printed a few months back. And unfortunately this model is just slightly too big to print the entire body on one plate. I did try various different types of orientation, however it just didn't fit. So at the time I just decided to cut the back end off of it and print it in two parts. That way I could keep the model in the original size. And I eventually did print off another version of this model. But this time I scaled it down slightly so that the model was about 1 inch shorter. That way I could print the entire body on one plate. And I started out by painting the original model that I split before printing, and I just glued the two parts together and then used some Vallejo putty to fill in the gaps. And after that the model was ready to be primed in black, before then applying the base coat, which would be Army Painter Deep Azure. And I applied this all over the model using an airbrush. Next I'm going to use Pro Acryl Dark Plum to paint in some purple trim around all of the edges of the armour panels. Then I just added a quick spray of Pro Acryl Plum to brighten up all of the purple areas. And it was at this stage when I couldn't decide whether to go with the Grimdark or heavy metal style. So I thought, why not just print off another? And that's when I printed the slightly smaller version. And that way I could do one version in each style. And for the second model, I just applied some basic battle damage with a hobby knife to some of the armour panels on the armour plates on the model, before priming and painting up the model in the same way as the larger one. And the next step was to apply some highlights to all of the turquoise of the armour panels. And to do that I just used some brighter colours from the turquoise triad. And I just applied some highlights to the cockpit, the raised area on the hull, and also the top part of the barrel of the gun. I also applied this to any of the edges or tips of the armour that weren't already painted in the purple colour. Next I applied a Eldar logo using a stencil set which I'd purchased a few months back, and I just fixed the stencil to the armour panel and then stippled on some white paint. And surprisingly this turned out pretty well. And after that was done, it was time to paint in the barrels of the guns and all of the thrusters. And to do that I used Army Painter Great Hall Grey and Brain Matter Beige. Firstly base coating all of these areas in the Great Hall Grey, and then just giving them all a light dry brush of the Brain Matter Beige. Next up, I wanted to tackle all of the glass panels on the cockpit, so I firstly painted these areas in black, and then used the Army Painter Vivid Blue Triad to paint in some highlights on the centre of the panels. And I just started from the darkest colour, working my way up to the brightest, making sure I leave a little bit of the previous colour still left behind. And after that I painted in all of the gems using the Army Painter Magenta Triad, and I'm not going to show that in this video as I've done it plenty of times in all of my other Mymeara videos, so if you want to see how I did them you can just check out one of my previous videos. And the next step was to take the model that I wanted to be more Grimdark and then stipple on some Army Painter Brigadine Brown. And I just used a large dry brush here and made sure that I wiped off most of the paint on the brush before lightly stippling this on to all of the edges and areas that I wanted some additional chip marks to be visible. And the next step for both models is to apply a coat of Villainy Inks Ichor of the Damned, and I mix this in 50-50 with some matte thinner, and then just apply this all over to both models, making sure I wick up any pooling and excess wash, and then leaving both models to dry overnight. And after that was done, the heavy metal style model was complete. And all that was left to do was add the final Grimdark touches to the Grimdark model. And I did that using a combination of Dirty Down Rust and Villainy Inc. Sector Rust, both of which are great rust effects, with the Dirty Down Rust being a really nice oily brown rust, and the Sector Rust from Villainy Inc. being a really nice orangey crusty rust. And I firstly applied the Sector Rust to all of the chips and cracks that I applied earlier on in the process, and used some white spirits to feather out any rough edges. And I then just applied some of the Dirty Down Rust to any areas I wanted to be extra rusty and oily. And then just used some water to feather out the edges from the Dirty Down. And after that had dried, that was the Grimdark model now completed as well. And I hope you enjoyed both these new additions to my Eldar Mymeara army. And I'm still not sure which model I like best. I'm kinda leaning towards the rusty Grimdark one, but I know some of you don't really like the idea of Eldar armour being able to rust, so that's why I did one of each. But do let me know down in the comments below which one you prefer. And as always, I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you in the next one.